They told me not to smoke drugs, but I wouldn't listen. Never thought I'd get caught and wind up in prison. Chalk it up to youth, but young age I ain't dissing. I guess I just had to get it out of my system. Out of my system. Out of my system.
And welcome to another episode of Uncarcerated. Uncarcerated is the show where we platform formerly, sometimes currently, incarcerated and systems impacted people and the folks working to shift the narrative, change policy. And we've got kind of a special episode. And it's something we haven't done on this show yet, weirdly enough. It kind of came to me the other day. By the way, we're recording at my house, so if you hear bells jingling, it's my annoying dogs. But I was thinking the other day, I've got this film coming out with Represent Justice, July 23rd, also called Uncarcerated. And it's my personal story with the prison system, how that is inextricably linked to our mental health care system, the lack of behavioral health and care and compassion I received in several traumatic incidents in my life. And we had never told that story on this show. And I've talked about my experience on this show with the guests, but I've never really told my story on this show. And I thought that might be important. And my original thought was have Kevin and Julius and Kelly, our sometimes co-host Kelly, interview me. And then I was thinking, those clowns don't want to hear me talk again. And who better to interview me than the person who knows me the best, my lovely wife, Abigail. So Abigail, my brilliant, brilliant wife, is going to just kind of talk to me about my experience with the prison system. And I have no idea what she's going to ask me. She has written out some questions. I have no clue where this is going to go, but I thought this might be important in leading up to the film. And obviously the listeners will get to know me a little better, and they'll get to know my lovely wife. Abigail, thank you for doing this on a Sunday when you could be doing anything else.
Of course, I'll try not to ask you too many embarrassing questions.
You know where the bodies are buried, for sure. Although I probably shouldn't use that term on this show. So not only, I just want to give her the proper due and credit here. Abigail's not just my wife. I'm more her husband. Abigail is the most brilliant social worker, activist, community engagement, advocate human. She has 9 jobs. She is the founder and executive director of Grace Grows, where she practices horticultural therapy with the homeless community. That's a boots on the ground thing, but also top-down systems work as the lead for the North Central Florida Food Systems Coalition, does a lot of work with food justice, but she also works intimately with systems impacted people, both there in her free time, what little of it there is, and then, of course, with a local free clinic getting care to people who otherwise wouldn't. So she understands this from multiple angles and then also knows me. So there couldn't be anybody better to ask these questions than my lovely wife. So thank you.
You're welcome. I think one of the reasons that I was originally attracted to you, other than your personality and how incredibly handsome you are, is because of how we had a shared understanding of these things. And I really enjoy all the times that we get to work together.
Yeah, me too. Abigail has taught me everything I know about doing this work. So she was my boss. And, I historically sleep with almost all my bosses. So I'm just kidding. I'm joking.
I was his boss ethically. I was the one that had to go to my boss to tell my boss that I could no longer be Leigh's boss because I had a crush on him.
Yeah, you had to report our relationship.
Yes, I had to report our relationship. I think my specific words were, I have feelings for Leigh.
Aw. What's really funny about us, and I told Julius this story when we were coming back from Montgomery. He was like, how did you guys meet? And I told him, she was my boss at the shelter. We both worked at this shelter. And I remember distinctly stocking the clothing closet with you one day and looking at you and telling you, we had grown close as friends, spent a lot of time together. And I was like, I just want you to know I have a ton of respect for you and I will never hit on you, because guys do that all the time. They're in close proximity with a woman. They misread stuff, or they just don't read stuff at all because it's about them. And they put women in these horrible, awkward, uncomfortable positions. So I was like, I'm never going to do that. And then a few weeks go by. We had gone to play skee ball. And I go home and I get this text message, hey, do you mind if I stop by? And I was like, yeah, for sure. And Abigail came over and she was like nervous and sweaty. She was like, I just want you to know.
Summertime, it's Florida.
I just want you to know I have feelings for you. And I was like, thank fucking God. Thank God one of us said it, because I never would have said anything about it. So, and here we are, years later.
I kind of wanted to start backwards with your story. I know a lot of folks who are listening know you, but I just wanted to ask you to describe your life in the different spheres that exist now. What are you doing? How do you feel about it? I know a lot of people know you professionally, but maybe just describe your personal life as well.
Oh, yeah. Okay. That's a really good question. So my day job is I'm the community engagement director for Family Promise here in Gainesville. So I work with families experiencing homelessness and on the verge of experiencing homelessness. My personal life, well, I try to spend as much time with you as possible, which is, I know, very annoying for you, but I love you very much. We go on adventures, typically don't have to spend a lot of money for the kind of adventures we go on. We go on long hikes in the woods. We go on spring trips. I love my 2 dogs, Ellie and Raven. My son, Elijah, is very important to me. I had Elijah when I was 18. I was a single dad until I met my late wife, Holly. And then Holly and I were together for 8 years, married for 5 years. And then on our 5th wedding anniversary, Holly passed away. And we had a daughter, Haley. So Elijah was 15 and Haley was 7 when Holly passed away. And then Haley passed away 1 week before her 18th birthday. So I've lost Holly and Haley, my wife and daughter. The person who's been with me through all of that is my son, Elijah. I tell people sometimes he went through all the trauma I went through, except he was a kid. Helping him navigate some stuff is really important to me. Sometimes I'm a dad, sometimes I'm a social worker with him. So yeah, he's super important to me. Yeah. Does that answer your question? That's what my life looks like.
Sometimes when people tell these stories, they want to wrap it up in a nice bow. And I think for the most part, our lives are really good. And so I just want to give people a realistic perspective. I'll get into some of the harder questions later as well. But how do you feel about your life now?
This is the happiest I've ever been in my life. This is the most stability and long-term non-chaos that's been in my life. And I've worked for 10 years now on creating a bubble, like a safe bubble around me. Prior to meeting you, I had created a little safe bubble. I had a little tiny cabin house in the woods. It was like a smaller version of your house, basically, our house now. And I worked at the shelter, and I was happy just doing that. I was happy being alone until you came along. It was the first time in my life that I had been alone for that long. I had always had, a wife or a partner or friends around. I had the kids in the house. There was a stretch where I was a single dad with Elijah, and then there was a stretch where I was a single dad with Elijah and Haley. And so I'd always had people around. And so it was like a really long stretch of being by myself and creating a safety bubble. So if there was things happening in my extended family that seemed chaotic, or with friends that I was helping or spending time with that seemed chaotic, I could keep stuff at an arm's distance and kind of create a bubble. And that bubble and that working with the homeless community led me to you. That bubble has just grown, and different people have fallen inside the bubble. And now I'm a ambassador and filmmaker for Represent Justice, and a podcaster, and I do a lot of like community work and stuff kind of like behind the scenes, off the stuff that doesn't fit into my job at Family Promise or doesn't fit into the podcast bubble. But yeah, I feel like that was, I may have said the word bubble 47 times there, but yeah, I like my life now. I feel very safe.
So I want to jump back to some of your experiences that drive you now. And so I don't want to talk about what happened yet. I want to talk about who you were before you were incarcerated. Often when I'm working with people who have been incarcerated and people at the same time, people who are in crisis, I see people that are really like tightened up and afraid of expressing themselves. But like as I work with them, I get these little glimpses into their inner child, and regardless of how they're stigmatized or perceived by people who have prejudice, there's always this like sweet little person underneath. And I could probably describe that about you because I see it often, but I was hoping that you could maybe talk about like who you were before you were incarcerated. Because you're very much the same person still, but I know it's created hardship and perspective shifts for you.
I think I've always been the same person, but I didn't recognize what some of my skills were. I just thought that that's who I am. And I think I'm extremely lucky and grateful now that I get to use who I am as skill sets in the jobs that I do and work that I do. You know, before there was a microphone in front of me or before I was doing community work, I was still creating communities around me. And so I grew up in Gainesville, Florida. I come from a long line of teachers. So my dad was an elementary school teacher. He taught at a school here in Gainesville on the east side in the Black community. So that's where I went for elementary school. So, you know, I had lots of friends that I'm still friends with now. You know, I felt like in elementary school, I created a little community for myself, and I did plays, and I made kids laugh in class. Often got me in a lot of trouble with my dad and my teachers. Middle school sucked, but middle school sucks for everybody. But it was really hard to make that transition from who I identified with in elementary school and then go to more of a predominantly white middle school with wealthier kids, and that wasn't who I was, and I didn't really fit into any category or box. And then when I went to high school, I went to a school called PK Young, and that was the University of Florida's lab school. And the interesting thing about PK is at the time, I don't know if they still do it that way, but at the time they would take 10 people from poverty, 10 people from a wealthy community, 10 people from, you know, so there was 86 in my graduating class, and you had every genre and subgenre of human you could think of. That's where I made my lifelong friends. My 6 best friends, we would all make little movies together. Our weekends were spent getting into shenanigans. We had a series of prank phone call tapes and movies that we made that circulated around Gainesville. Then when I was 17, I had a public access TV show called The Cutting Room Floor with one of my best friends, Stoney. And he directed it, and I wrote sketches. Performing was like the most impactful experience for me, whether it was getting on stage or telling jokes in class or doing this public access show. It was where I felt like the most comfortable, where I could take community and things that I observed and like turn it into art. So I had a lot of fun doing that, and that's kind of what I wanted to do when I grew up. But then when I was 18, I had Elijah. And so my friends moved on to Los Angeles, to Full Sail in Orlando, to New Orleans, and went to Tulane and became production artists and filmmakers and directors. And I was here with Elijah. Sort of the easiest thing to do in Gainesville, if you wanted to be creative, was to hop on the radio. And so that's what I did. I worked at a bunch of restaurants and I worked landscaping and all the stuff to pay the bills. But I was working at this place called Joe's Deli, which was across the street from the University of Florida's. It would be really slow in there during the week. And there was this radio show called Super Freak All Stars. It was like an AM radio show. And I started prank calling them and calling in and joking around. They were like, hey, you're pretty funny. Why don't you come down here? That was the start of a 12-year radio career. So I was on the radio for a long time in Gainesville. Ended up having a morning show. I hosted a punk rock show called Salvation, the Punk Rock Revival. That sort of introduced me to another community. I was the promotions director for 7 radio stations here. And I had another group of lifelong friends that I had made at this very special time in Gainesville. There was like a 6-7 year stretch in Gainesville where some really impactful punk rock bands were starting to get big outside of Gainesville. And then there was a bunch of bands who didn't get big that were awesome. Kevin, my co-host here on Uncarcerated, our friend Kevin, was in one of those bands, Strike Force Diablo. And Against Me, Hot Water Music, who, by the way, just agreed to let me use their music for the film, which I'm very excited about. And I'm never not going to mention that.
It's so exciting. It's sweet.
And so it was a really cool time to be on the radio because you had all these bands, you had a couple of cool venues, you had a great label, No Idea Records, independent label. And so there was an energy in Gainesville that I like dove right into. And so it was really exciting, but I will say I didn't like practice any level of self-care. The other thing about me is that I work really hard. I was a father and a husband, but I was also like a radio performer and doing promotions and all sorts of stuff. And so I had high energy, but I also partied and didn't take great care of myself. I don't know how long that would have lasted before I crashed or if I ever would have crashed, but Holly passing away was the precursor to a series of some really traumatic crashes for me.
Yeah, so that leads me into the next question, which is what happened? The transition from old Leigh and little Leigh into a much harder experience for quite some time.
So my wife passed away on October 5th, 2007, which was our 5th wedding anniversary. And I was like thrust into being a single dad again. I didn't have any time to grieve because I was a single dad. Simultaneously, like that was happened in October. In December, we lost our apartment. We had a free apartment for a year through the radio station, and that contract went up. So now the kids and I are in a hotel trying to find housing on one income, which was like impossible. We never got our footing back after that. Eventually found a place to live, but it wasn't great. It was like this dilapidated house over on 6th Street that like used to be an office. It was really depressing. My sister was going through a lot of issues at the time because Holly passed away at her house in the middle of the night. Holly died from walking pneumonia. She was sick and didn't even know it. That really broke my sister in ways that I don't know that she's even recovered from to this day. She didn't even have support systems or friends because it didn't happen to her and it didn't happen to her husband. You know, I don't think anybody's ever really taken the time to like work with Kelly and like pull that out of her and help her heal. And so my sister came to live with us for a little while, and that was also like a nightmare. I was not any state to take care of her too. That pressure that I feel like my dad put on me to like be a good big brother was kind of a running theme in my family and a running theme throughout my life, that like take care of everyone else before you. So it's your responsibility to take care of the kids. It's your responsibility to now take care of your sister. Leigh fit nowhere into that equation. Weed and pills were in the picture for me for sure. Just anything to like keep going and anything to not feel and anything to numb. And I feel like prior to Holly dying, some of that was kind of like fun and recreational. And after Holly died, it was sad and traumatic and just like toxic and poisonous. So about 2 years after she passed away, I decided that I wasn't going to live anymore, I picked an inhalant to do that with. And honestly, I don't know if it was like suicide in the traditional like hang yourself sense, but it also wasn't like addiction either.
Knowing you, it feels like maybe oblivion was less painful than what you were experiencing.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I had this horrible toothache when I was like 23. Going to the dentist is super expensive, and I couldn't get this wisdom tooth out. And I remember I would take like a toothbrush and just like press it on the painful spot so bad that I would almost pass out. It hurt so bad, but when that pain went away, the normal pain didn't hurt as bad. And that's kind of like what the duster thing was. It was like, can I make myself hurt? I either knock myself out for a little while or make myself hurt so bad that when I come back to this pain, this loss, won't feel so bad. And, you know, it wasn't a conscious thing, but it definitely was the underpinnings of what was happening. You know, my friend Jen, she had kids my kid's age. We lived together. We shared a vehicle. She didn't know what to do. She was panicked. And so her and my mom and my friend Julie like kind of made a collective decision to go look for me, but also to call the non-emergency line. And the lady on the non-emergency line was like, I think the quote was, "We can't go look for your boyfriend while he's on a bender. But if you call 911 and report the car stolen, then we can send somebody out to look for him." And so that's what happened. I had pulled the car over and parked, and I was like walking through a neighborhood, and I heard, well, first I saw a Alachua County sheriff's car, and then I saw a second one and a third one. And I was like, oh, maybe that's for me. And so I started walking faster and faster. But I was like, I don't really know what I've done to be seeing the cops, right? So like it didn't compute. Not only am I in a duster fog and really sad and depressed, but also I didn't commit a crime. You know, I hadn't like stolen anything or hurt anybody except for myself. So I was like, maybe this isn't for me. And then I look and they're like walking faster after me. And then I hear my name. "Freeze, Mr. Scott. Get on the ground. Freeze, Mr. Scott." And so I started like running away from them because I was scared. I didn't want to get beaten up. It should be noted that didn't work. I did get beaten up. There was like at least 6 of them, and they threw me on the ground. They released a dog on me. So the dog is biting my legs while they're on top of me. And then they tased me. So it was like all 3. I think any one of those measures probably would have worked. You know, I think their argument was I didn't stop. I didn't freeze. I was like thrashing around, but that's not what my perspective was.
And as you were saying that, I was thinking about just like how much I love you and thinking about how that happened to you and imagining it in my mind just like really breaks my heart. Because I know you. I know that you're not violent, that you always approach people in such a thoughtful way, even when you're squirrely and energetic or having a hard time. And I was just thinking about that one time that we went down to Crystal River to see the manatees and how we were swimming and we accidentally got surrounded by manatees and you got really scared. There was this manatee that just like lifted its head up in the water and looked you in the eyes, and you like gasping for breath, like pretty terrified in the moment, even though I thought it was very magical and kind of funny. And it like juxtaposed with that experience, like I know that you would never hurt anyone. And in fact, like you get scared kind of easy sometimes.
I try to go out of my way to not hurt stuff.
Yeah, like you're pretty averse to violence.
Confrontation, not my fave. Yeah. I got to say, though, given the choice, would have preferred the manatees tried to pull me over. Yeah, so I wind up in the jail. They put me in the mental health pod in a turtle suit. That's the suit they give you because you're naked, because they think, you know, we don't know what this guy's going to do with his shoelaces, with his bobos that we give you. And so I'm in there for a couple weeks. Fast forward to being in front of the judge and I had never had felonies before. Like the only time I had ever gotten in trouble before was like driving on a suspended license. So I didn't know how any of this stuff worked. And I got the advice to open plea, not knowing that gives up any rights to appeal, and it puts it all in the judge's hands. And the judge said, I had grand theft auto and battery on a police officer. Jen had called the state attorney to tell them he didn't steal a car, this is what happened. But the state picked it up anyway, which forced me to be in front of the judge open pleading. And the judge said, Mr. Scott, I'm going to save you from yourself, 5 years, Department of Corrections.
Yeah. And something that really strikes me about that situation, knowing you, is that once you interact with law enforcement, you're already considered a criminal. People who don't have money for defense don't get justice. It does not exist for people without money.
Definitely was my experience in there that the jail was full of people who didn't have $200 for a bond, couldn't afford an attorney, and mostly for stuff that like didn't need a cage. I had always thought that like the cage was for Ted Bundy, right? Like, here's someone who just can't be around the rest of us. And that's not what it was like in jail or prison, honestly. The thing that I don't talk about a lot, and we talked about this in the film, but we didn't talk about the effect it had on my kids and the separation from my kids. Here I was a single dad with Elijah before I met Holly. And then after Holly passed away, I was a single dad again. The argument is, well, if you loved your kids, you wouldn't have done this, right? You wouldn't have put yourself in this position. And I have heard that. It wasn't a choice. It wasn't like a conscious choice. I was just in a lot of pain. And I wish I could go back and do it over again. I wish I had like grief counseling and more compassionate crisis response, which is what I fight for now. I didn't do those things, and I didn't have those things. And so not being with Elijah and Haley, being in a cage and being in prison was one massive wound. The other massive wound was being separated from my kids. Like every single day, that was like in the back of my mind, in the front of my mind. It was extremely painful to not be around Elijah and Haley. And they got separated. Elijah was a wily 15, 16, then 17-year-old when I went to prison. And Haley was 8 and 9 when I got in trouble. And so Haley went to live with my late wife's parents. And Elijah went with my family. And then bounced around between friends and family. And it was not a good time for either one of them, but the fact that they were separated was really painful for them too.
So that leads me into the next question, which was, what were some of the hardest parts about being incarcerated, the impacts it had on you? I know you talked about the impacts it had on your family. But what were some of the hardest parts for you?
Lack of information was the first one. I don't know that that's the most important one, but it was the one that was like really stood out to me, that I really thrive on community and I thrive on information. And eventually I landed at a camp where I was able to create a community, but just constantly starved for information, for any kind of like, connection and, like genuine connection. And so the loneliness was really, really hard. Getting to see people abused was extremely hard for me. Watching people get thrown in a laundry closet by the corrections officers, verbally abused daily, multiple times daily, watching people be humiliated and embarrassed, have their food thrown in the trash, have their commissary taken away, being shaken down at any point where like guards come in and you have to, either stand for hours while they search your personal things, or, watching people go to the box because they had to go to the bathroom during a shakedown, which actually happened to me. I just couldn't hold my pee any longer and I was going to like piss myself. And so I had to cuff up and go to the box because I had to pee during a shakedown. And those kinds of things, like we could do a whole show just on that. So watching people be humiliated and physically and verbally abused hearing the stories, the now adults that had started in the juvenile camps, the JIT camps, as we call them in Florida, gladiator camps. For a long time in Florida, if you were a YO, a youth offender, they couldn't send you to an adult prison, so they would send you to somewhere like Brevard or Lancaster. And the horror stories of guards betting on fights, pitting one kid against another kid, putting a kid from one gang into a pod with another rival gang just to watch what happened, turning kids that their frontal lobe isn't even fully developed, wounded, traumatized, neglected foster care kids, going to these violent places and watching adult men bet on who was going to lose a fight.
To be clear, the prison guards were betting on
Correct.
children.
Hearing those stories from friends of mine who now are like 23, 24, 25, and they're going to get out when they're 26 and have to go get a job. And just like seeing how that like damned you for the rest of your life. That was near the top of the list of the hardest things because I had never experienced anything like that before. So,
what did you wish you knew when you were incarcerated? Not just like survival tricks, but like mentally, what do you wish that you had known that would have helped prepare you for the experience?
So your question isn't what had I wish I'd known or did to avoid the experience, but like I'm already going to prison. What had I wished I'd known?
Yeah.
I actually don't have that wish because when I was in county jail, being the nerd researcher that I am, I buddied up to a couple of guys. One guy who I had known since I was like 17, and he had been to prison twice already, and he was on his way back for a third time. And I played Scrabble with him every day, and he didn't know that I was interviewing him and picking his brain, but that's exactly what I was doing. I would just ask him like, what should I prepare for? What is this experience like? What are the do's and don'ts? And, he kind of put me up on everything. One of the main things he told me that I remembered is when you get to the reception center, when you first get to prison, when you get to Lake Butler and you're walking to your dorm or you're walking to the chow hall and you hear a guard yell out, "Hey, stupid!" do not turn around. Whatever you do, even if you think they're talking to you, do not turn around. And he was right. And I didn't. And I watched people who did turn around. And it was not good, and it could be like little things, but that's what they would do. They would stand out on the yard and they would yell, "Hey, stupid!" And whoever turned around was going to get punished. And they would do stuff like sweep the sunshine off the sidewalks was a big one. Walk in circles for hours with your arms out, which doesn't seem super hard, but try it. Try it for about 15 minutes and then multiply that times 6 hours. And so, that was just one example, but he gave me a lot of those examples because in Florida, it's not true in every state, depending on where you're listening to this, but in Florida, it's not the other guys you're doing time with that you have to worry about. It's the corrections officers. And that's a pretty known fact. And so he told me exactly what to expect, and he was right.
So it's a lot of like persistent trauma when you're in there, daily like fear and oppression. And I think people don't realize the level of complex trauma that is caused for people that are incarcerated for any length of time. And I know that your story has some twists and turns. I was wondering if you would want to speak to your experience when you were incarcerated in Indiana.
It's not something that I talk about a lot, and we didn't, we just made a short film, so we didn't have a chance to like talk about the whole experience, but completely different than the one in Florida. I was released from prison in Florida after 5 years, and you have to kind of think about, I have this awful trauma of losing my wife, that is completely unresolved, compounded now by the trauma of being in a cage and separated from my kids, and then the daily abuse and trauma from just being in prison and what that's like. So it's just trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma on top of abuse on top of neglecting to heal from any of those things. And then Here's your big day. Here's your big day. Time to come home. And so, my original plan was to come home in Florida to go to work release, save up enough money from work release to get a little place, start my life over again, reconnect with Elijah and Haley. And that was my plan. And so I get to, when you've got about a year left, you're eligible for work release. So at my 9-month mark, I got sent to Bridges of America, which was the work release here in Gainesville. And I get a job within my first week. And within my first 2 weeks, I get 2 jobs. And so I had 2 jobs at 2 restaurants. I was working about 70 hours a week, riding my bike about 15 miles a day between the work release center and the 2 jobs. I finally have a day off, and in work release, you have an ankle monitor, which was attached to this little pager that you had to have on at all times. And one day I'm laying in my bed, have a day off. I'm finally resting my body, and I get a message on my pager, come to the officer station. So I come down to the officer station, the guard. And by the way, I should mention that these work release centers were taken over by private institutions. So it's corrections officers in corrections officers type uniforms, but they're not Florida Department of Corrections. They're free world. It's run by Bridges is the name of the company. And so the officer said, "What's wrong with your ankle monitor?" And I said, "I don't know. You tell me. I'm laying in my bed." And he said, "It says it came off." I show him it's still on. He comes around, he tugs on it, and it snaps right off. And he goes, "That's going to be absconding." And I said, "What? I'm laying in my bed." He said, "Yeah, you break your ankle monitor, and that's going to be absconding." Your prison experience is like being in the upside down. It's like down is up, left is right. There's no logic to it at all, which is really hard for me because I'm like I want to think through everything. Thankfully, the director in his suit and tie comes out and he sees what happened, and he said, "That's Scott. He's got a job. He's doing the right thing. Put another ankle monitor on him, and then you can go back to work tomorrow. But you're going to have to pay for that. So it's going to be like $550. It's going to come out of your paychecks." And so, I'm thinking that's their racket, And so 2 days go by. I go back to work on Thursday. I go back to work on Friday. And on my way back to the center on Friday, I get a message, "Pack your stuff." And so I get back, and they said you have to go to the box at Marion Work Camp, and you can appeal from Marion Work Camp, but they're sending any of you back who had any infractions. So in a 2-week period, 27 of us got sent back, and all 27 of us got put on DOT, Department of Transportation work squads. So I got sent back on a Friday, was in the box on Saturday and Sunday. Monday, I have a shovel in my hand. I'm on the side of I-75. My family called Tallahassee and they tried to, fight for me. But, instead of spending my last 9 months saving money, I spent my last 9 months giving free labor. And so I finally come home, and now I'm not going to be able to find a place to live. And I had reconnected with a high school friend of mine who we dated in high school. And she said, I'm going through a divorce. You can come out here to Santa Monica with me. And so I go to California, and obviously, if I, rewind to the beginning of part of my story, all my best friends are in Los Angeles. So I figured I'll go out here. I'll work on the set with my friends, Arnie and Stoney. I'll get some production experience. And, I'm out there for a couple of weeks, and she says, "I got into grad school in Terre Haute, Indiana. So do you want to go to Indiana?" And I was like, I guess, yeah. I mean, I don't have any place to go at this point. We're dating. She was really supportive. She helped me get a car. She helped me, find a place in Indiana. But we had a really weird relationship, It was very hot, cold. Which was kind of my type, It was like, "I love you. I just want to be friends. I'm in love. Let's have some space." And so now I'm in the middle of Indiana, Terre Haute, Indiana, which, by the way, ranks 49 out of 50 most depressed states in the country. It's an industrial wasteland with a tiny college, Indiana State University, in the center of it. But everything else is factories and methamphetamines. It's just so depressing. But I do my best. I get a job at Ruby Tuesdays. I even get a little radio show there for 97.3 The Bird. So I'm back on the radio within a few months of coming home from prison. But I'm in a very depressed state in a relationship that left me constantly questioning my own existence. Here was somebody going for their master's degree with a savings account, and I'm just coming home from prison. When I would have to go meet her family, I just felt so bad about myself all the time. And I don't think she intentionally wanted me to feel bad about myself. I think in many ways she was super supportive, and it was a really good landing spot. But just emotionally, I felt horrible all the time. And I went to therapy. I kind of was what did I not do the first time I was depressed? So I went to therapy. They put me on medication, which just made it worse. And I self-destructed all over again. I had a series of incidents with inhalants again, and I could not pull myself out of it. I would do it. I'd self-destruct. I'd feel suicidal. I would go to a 72-hour lockdown, a Baker Act. They would release me with different medications. I would feel worse. 2 weeks later, I would do it all over again. At this point, her and I are not talking anymore. I've terrorized Terre Haute with my repeated duster incidents. So the last time I went to a Menards, which is like Home Depot down here, but it's up there. They have Menards. And so I'm going in and buying duster cans and going behind Menards in an empty tire factory and huffing duster all day long. And I just kept saying to myself, please don't wake up. Please don't wake up. Please don't wake up. That's all I would say over and over and over again. Please don't wake up. Please don't wake up. Go in one last time to get duster. And my dog's having a dream right now. My dog's dreaming about my duster experience. It's yelping in the background. You hear that? I think I can hear it in my headphones.
Yeah. Her
little puppy noises. I'm not going to edit this out at all. It's a perfect part of this story. So I'm too messed up to make it to the register. So I decide I'm just going to steal the can of duster. And I put this can of duster down my pants. And as I'm walking out of Menards, someone goes, uh-uh. And I go, uh-huh. And I tried to run past them. And the guy tackles me. And it's just a guy with a polo and jeans on. He tackles me and I'm like, this is citizen's arrest here, Well, he was a detective. He was an undercover detective guy, fraud prevention guy, maybe. I don't know. And so they take me into the little room. They take the duster can out of my pants. None of this is embarrassing, by the way. And they take me to jail. And in Indiana, they have a drunk tank. So you can go sober up for 24 hours and they let you go. And sometimes you get charged with something and sometimes you don't. And so my charge was petty theft. The next morning I wake up and they say, Scott, get dressed. So I get dressed. I'm trying to figure out where I'm going to go. I probably have to go to Sober Living. They had a place you could go to 2 Sober Livings. One was called Club Soda and one was called Freebirds. And that was my options at that point. And so I'm getting dressed and I go to the counter to get my stuff and I see the detective on the other side of the counter and he looks at me and says, I'm going to make sure this never happens again. And I was like, what the fuck does that mean? And they said, Scott, go back in the holding cell. So I go stand in there for 15, 20 minutes. I'm like, what the fuck is happening? And they slip papers through the hole, the tray hole. And it was battery on a police officer and robbery. That's what they upped the charges to.
Jesus. From
petty theft. So for $5.89 can of duster, I now have a robbery on my record. And I get a public defender who says, plea out. Now, rewind to Florida. You'd think I'd know not to do this, but, I'm alone. I'm scared. I'm alone. I'm in Indiana. I don't know anybody. And he was like, just plea out to the robbery and, they'll let you go on an ankle monitor. And so that was the start of my my Indiana carceral experience. $5.89 can of duster.
You're one of those people that folks really look up to. And when they're having a hard time, they look to you for guidance. You've told me a lot about some of the time that you spent incarcerated, how you created classes for people and like therapeutic experiences. You have always been a person that generates hope for people, whether you were incarcerated, working with people, or experiencing homelessness. And I'm just wondering, while you were incarcerated, what generated hope for you? Where did you find that?
Oh, my outdate? Yeah, I mean,
You've told me about some of your buddies.
yeah, I will say that there's a lot of talk about drugs in prison. The most addictive drug in prison, hands down, not even close. The most addictive drug in prison is hope. You are imagining 24 hours a day what your life is going to look like when you come home. You hope you'll get out. You hope you'll make it through the day. You hope someone will write you a letter. You hope somebody will visit you. You hope people still love you on the outside. You hope your kids will remember you. You hope you'll still have friends. You hope your whole life isn't going to pass you by. So it's nothing but hope all the time.
Thank you, baby. What are some things that you're still processing? How has it affected your life, or how does it affect your life today?
Yeah. I am just now, I've been in therapy for 2 years now, and I'm just now getting into the EMDR part of therapy. So like deep trauma work. And the thing we're focused on right now, the thing I'm focused on in therapy, is my carceral experience. Like, think of all the things that I just talked about for the last hour in a bucket, and that's what I'm focusing on in therapy. So the harm that was done to my body in those incidents with the police, the harm that I did to my body with the duster, the inhaling, hitting my head, all the things that go with the duster thing, being handcuffed so tight that your wrist hurt, hearing that cage door slam, watching people that you care about be abused, watching people that you care about get neglected by their families and friends start to forget about them, their girlfriends move on, watching that day in and day out. Yeah, I'm still processing all of that, and it still affects me, and it affects how I interact with the world in some ways, both good and bad. My level of empathy and compassion and like showing up for somebody even after the 17th time that they've relapsed. I have like a really high tolerance for that because I was in the same boat. But it also affects me negatively. I worry a lot. There's always like a little seed of doubt that like all of this will get taken away, that you'll die, that, the cops are just going to show up and take me away and throw me in a cage, yeah, I'm still affected by the carceral experience for sure.
Earlier when we were talking, you talked about the mask that you had to wear, taking care of your kids when you were grieving. And I'm wondering if you could speak to how, you experienced trauma before, during, it doesn't just like you don't get out and then like suddenly you're okay. Happy ending, you're out and like your life's perfect now. I'm wondering if you could talk about the effects of complex trauma and how that affects people, your peers, yourself, that mask that people often are still wearing.
Yeah. I think everybody wears a mask to make it through the day because the truth is everybody's walking around with big T and little t traumas. Prison just compounds that.
But it also like is probably the most stigmatized thing in our society.
Yeah. And, even talking about the Indiana experience on here is a little traumatizing for me, because I think people are starting to get a little more understanding of going to jail or going to prison. I think there was a level of understanding for me, like, oh my God, you went to prison in Florida for what? But then I come home and I do it all over again. And that's like shame inducing and embarrassing. And, I'm sure that for my first couple years home, people still had a lot of doubt in me. It's been a long time now. But I think I always feel like I have to prove myself. Like I've got to work harder than the other people around me. And there is a level of embarrassment and shame. And honestly, it's one of the reasons I started doing this show, was because I wanted to find out, when I came home from prison, and then shortly after that, my daughter passed away, I didn't want to have the same thing happen all over again. So, like I said, I created a little safety bubble for myself. I was, in therapy. There's things that I have to do every day to take care of myself. Going for walks, music, writing, creativity. And Haley passing away, I felt like I cannot fully grieve this. I can't take a day off work. I can't be as sad as I want to be, because I'll go back to jail. And so that link in my brain is traumatizing. There's this like piece of me that is like, you can't be all the way sad, because all the way sad means cops, jail. And I'm still trying to disconnect that link in therapy and in other ways, but I started doing this show because I was like, I want to talk to other people that have gone to jail, gone to prison, and find out, like, why did they go back? Why is our recidivism rate within 3 years at 65%? Like, what's the through line? And so, yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but.
Yeah, I think that answers my question. I kind of saved like a couple of the hard questions for near the end.
Those weren't the hard ones?
We're getting there. So earlier you talked about you're really good intellectually about understanding what parts of like society and the carceral systems teach you to think things that are destructive about yourself and about other people. But I know you really well, and I know sometimes you blame yourself. And, naturally, I think a lot of us do that when bad things happen. But I was wondering if you could speak to how this whole carceral punishment system teaches people, it like breaks people down, teaches people that they are bad and that they need to be fixed or they need to be punished. Can you talk about what that does to somebody's mind, or even like on a societal level? What part is society? What part is prison?
Yeah. I think the prison system and how we view prison and how we view getting in trouble is just how the rest of society is in every segment you can think of, but just on steroids. Because I think that shame element, that you were bad, you need to be fixed, now you are good, now I will praise you, that is replicated in our rehab system, in our systems of recovery. The same themes you hear about needing salvation and needing grace and resurrecting your life and redemption, you hear that in religion. You hear it in 12 steps. And I just don't subscribe to that. Like, no part of the story that I just told is you were a bad person, you went to a cage, now you are a good person, now you're redeemed. Now, it's still in me somewhere there still is a part of me that's like, I do need redemption. I do need validation. That's the human experience. Everybody needs validation, right? And it does affect me. But I am always actively trying to work against that. And I definitely don't subscribe to it in other people. I subscribe to it with myself sometimes. I got to catch myself sometimes. But, you know, the folks that I work with that are systems impacted or experiencing homelessness, I don't think they need to be corrected. Now, there's things that I wish they would do in their life because I know it would make their life better. But, you know, what I see are like really oppressive systems of poverty and economic injustice and a lack of access to mental health and to healthcare that just don't provide space for healing. That's what I see. And so I think, the way we view stuff that, like, you know, Leigh, you went to prison and you came home and now we're going to give you another chance. Oh, you went back again. You know, you just are bad. I think that that's one of the reasons we do this show, is to like show that that's not true. I think that's the through line in all the people we've interviewed, is that we're not talking to people who need to be redeemed.
So I think about all these moments where people could be helped. People could show empathy to people who are struggling. And I think about how you have been working with people who are experiencing homelessness, people who are coming home. You still talk to people inside. And you take so much of your experience to help people have a path forward and to help people understand that their lives could be better, or that somebody does understand what they're going through. And sometimes I think you forget about yourself. And, you know, you admitted to this earlier, that sometimes Leigh doesn't come into the picture. And I also have CPTSD, and there was an exercise that I did some years ago with my first good therapist.
Sorry. I have to interrupt you. The dog smells so bad. This is the smelliest dog. I'm sorry. I'm interrupting Abigail for a second because our dog ate something yesterday it wasn't supposed to, and the entire house smells.
So what I want you to do is, instead of thinking of like a client or a participant or somebody that you're working with, I want you to pretend that you went to prison to visit slightly younger Leigh. After the first time, or after you were incarcerated in Indiana, you went and sat down across from yourself with your life experience, your temperament, your ADHD, all the beautiful things about you. Look at yourself, and what would you say to yourself?
Play the lottery numbers 17, 22, 39, 43. No, I'm sorry. I would tell myself to love myself the way I love other people. I mean, that's it in a sentence. If I could go back and talk to myself before I was incarcerated or during, it would be, please love yourself. You are worth loving yourself. You are worth it. And you are worth loving yourself the way that you love other people. And if you can do that every single day, if you can like practice self-care and tell yourself nice things and turn down the mean voice inside your head and turn up the kind voice, if you can do that every day, you're going to have the best life you possibly can have. Also, you're always going to be poor because you're a social worker.
Thank you, baby. I think I just want to share the thing that I always think about is that, you know, other than the fact that, like, you know, sometimes I get irritated. I think you're perfect and you didn't deserve this. And you deserved so much more than what you experienced. And there's so many people out there that are the same way, regardless of, you know, whether there were things that got you in trouble, you know, like that are just like part of you. Like people should get to be human. And I've heard you say before that people should be able to make mistakes. And I love you.
I love you too. Thank you for spending the afternoon with me doing this. You
You're
could
welcome.
be doing literally anything else right now. All right. I love you.
They told me not to smoke drugs, but I wouldn't listen. Never thought I'd get caught and wind up in prison. Chalk it up to youth, but young age I ain't dissing. I guess I just had to get it out of my system, out of my system, out of my system.